Greetings, everyone, and welcome to our very first show of We the People, presented by the Diamond Factory. Tonight, we are using our premiere show to actually lay the foundation for shows to come. We want to have people on the show that represent uh, not only as current role models, but maybe as a warning as well as a insight into what may happen at least the next 4 years, and if we do not watch ourselves, maybe even longer. Uh, I remind you that there was a statement made that this would possibly be our last election. So just think of that as I introduce our first guest, Mr. Deric Gilliard. Uh, Welcome, sir, and how is your evening?
It's all good. Glad to be here. Been looking forward to this. So let's do it.
All right. First of all, why don't you fill our listeners in on a little bit of background about yourself? You have a very remarkable career, and I'm going to let you kind of give it your own timeline.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you, James. I was born in 1954, just celebrated my 70th birthday in November. My parents met in the Army. As you know, back in the 40s and the 50s, that was one of the only outlets that black folk had. And my mother was from the same town that Martin Luther King Sr. was from, Stockbridge, Georgia. My father was from Benton, Louisiana. And so neither of them, were highly educated or anything. So because my father stayed in the military, made a career out of it, two tours in Nam and one in Korea. I like to tell people he was gone so much because he was running from my mother, and there's probably a little bit of truth to that. But finally, he was shot down out of a helicopter and retired. So because of what they did and the time we were in, I got the chance to spend time in a lot of different cultures with different peoples. Was I think I was on the boat to Germany at about 4 years old, and so lived in Texas, lived in Kansas. When my father would go off to war, we might move back here, or we might move off the base. So I had a lot of spent a lot of time again on military bases or cities that supported them. Grew up being very patriotic because that was kind of the way it was, and was really kind of in a hurry to get out of the deep south. I was born in Atlanta, actually in Fort McPherson, which now is most famously known as Tyler Perry Studios, right? And but I was born in the Jim Crow South, in the Jim Crow society, and so it was a shock to me to leave Atlanta, which is nothing like what Atlanta is in, even though uh, it was doing some great things in as well. But to find out that racism wasn't simply a Southern thing. And so that's kind of the background. Went on to college, went on to journalism school when I figured out I wasn't going to be a Major League Baseball player. And one thing I tell young people today, you need to be able to figure out how to do more than one thing. You can chase your passion and your dream, but at the meantime, be getting your education or learning a craft so that you got more than, one thing going for you. And finished from journalism school, stayed out in the Midwest a bit, came back to Atlanta, worked for a couple of historically black colleges and universities, Clark College in Atlanta, and then Fort Valley State. Worked for a couple particularly one, black newspaper, the Atlanta Daily World, the oldest black daily newspaper in the country at the time. That was a phenomenal experience. Covered things like the missing and murdered children's cases, and when Maynard Jackson had the set aside, which is the first Southern city for sure, to set aside to say that at least 20% of the contracts in the city had to go to black vendors, black companies, so I got to do some pretty cool things. And then I walked into the door of Dr. King's organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which changed my life totally, my focus, my vision, and all that. And I know we'll talk about that later. And then after Dr. Lowry retired, I went to work for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services for the 8 Southeastern states. And during my 25-year tenure, I always worked for the political appointee over the 8 Southeastern states who was responsible to the secretary to implement his or her policies. And so I started with Clinton in 98. I worked with Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, and the first 2 years of the Biden administration. And the Trump administration was unlike any other. And so it prompted me to write my latest book, The Longest 4 Years of My Life, A View from the Field by a Black Fed in the Trump administration.
Yeah, that should kind of bring us pretty much up to speed, and then we'll ask you about any upcoming events or things of that nature. But uh, going back to your early career and your influences, let's start with your journalistic beginnings. What inspired you to pursue a career in journalism, and how did your early work at USA Today, uh, Time, and the Wichita Eagle, was that Eagle Beacon,
Yeah,
change your approach to storytelling?
it's a great question. I would say that, as a kid, I was very introverted, very shy. This was the era, James, and you'll remember this, when it wasn't cool to be the darkest kid, right? It was the light skinned brothers that, got the women, and,
Good
and, and,
area.
and my older cousins, when I lived with them and I was the last one following them all around, they used to call me Skillet. Now, you'll recognize that. No, our white audiences would not, but so I did not have a great self-image, but so I love to read, and I developed a knack for writing. And so I said, well, you know, um, I can turn this into a career. And so USA Today, most of the things I did with initially was sports writing, because I said, okay, I'm not going to be a New York Yankee, so let me cover sports. And that's what I did for USA Today. I would submit items every day, basically covering local small colleges, high school sports for them for about their first 10 years of existence. And then my first job out of college was in Wichita, which is the largest city in Kansas, and I was a sports writer there. So that was kind of my initial start. And then again, when I came back south to Atlanta to work at the Atlanta Daily World, it was great because I got to cover everything. I covered City Hall. I covered the police beat. I covered the Olympics. I got a chance to do all kind of really, really great things. And as I mentioned, things like the missing and murdered children's cases. And I got to hobnob and meet some of the elite of Atlanta, which was a really cool thing. So that kind of gave me my foundation, and really, I would say, prepared me ultimately for my time at the SCLC. First, it prepared me to go work at some of the HBCUs, as I mentioned, Clark Atlanta University, well, then Clark College and Fort Valley State, where at first I was a public affairs officer, and then I was the communications director at Fort Valley State.
Uh, can I ask you about some of your experiences in Kansas?
Absolutely, absolutely. So
I'm,
what was Kansas like?
I mean, thinking back, in those days, I'm born in 1947, so I'm just a little older than you are. But I do remember, uh, whereas we all thought, that racism was, confined to the South. States like Kansas and Missouri, there was also a certain amount of racism in those areas. Also, did you encounter any of that?
I would agree. I mean, there's racism everywhere. There's no question about it. You know, I take some pride in most of what happened at Kansas. Now, Wilt Chamberlain went out to school at Kansas, and and he encountered some racism. He said if certain things didn't change, he was going to leave. And of course, that's Wilt Chamberlain, right? So, whereas he wasn't an outspoken defender of the race, but he put his mark there. But I think there were certain things. I'll go all the way back to just right at the Civil War. So they call Kansas bloody Kansas or bleeding Kansas because the people of Missouri wanted to make it a slave state. And so, one of our biggest rivals when I went to the University of Kansas was University of Missouri because Quantill Trill and his raiders actually crossed the border and burned down Lawrence and killed a bunch of people in a quest to make it a, a slave state. But you had people like Gordon Parks who wrote The Learning Tree. So there was you had Nicodemus, Kansas, one of the all black slave founded towns. So I think that one of the things for me I did like about Kansas for the most part is that because there weren't that many of us, we weren't considered a threat. In fact, sometimes when my family would go back, and some of my children would say it was kind of unsettling to them because people were so nice in Kansas. Now, obviously, it wasn't all that way. That way, I wrote about in my latest book about how in Derby, Kansas, they moved all the voting booths out of town because it had a high Latino population, so they couldn't get there to vote. So lots of stuff happened in Kansas and everywhere else, and I always swore I wouldn't spend a nickel in Missouri because Missouri, a few years ago, and then, Missouri's pretty famous. What Michael Brown killing and lots of things that have happened in Missouri. In fact, the NAACP called Missouri the most dangerous state at one time, not that many years ago. So the Midwest is interesting. I mean, I saw some things, and there were things. I know Jackie Robinson was based at Fort Riley, and so was Joe Louis, I think, at one time, and they definitely ran into to some racism when they were at Fort Riley, Kansas. So it was, but for the most part, being on a military base, and you've probably seen a lot of this, particularly by the time you got into the late '60s and early '70s. I think at least there was a recognition of a certain amount of equality there. It was a certain amount, at least is what I experienced. But again, I never served. I was just a kid of a career person. So it was probably very different than your experience. But, so uh, I saw some, but, for the most part, I was fairly sheltered from it at that point.
Well, you were relatively safe if you were on Fort Benning, but if you dared to go to Phoenix City, Alabama, uh, it, it was
Yeah.
kind of a sundown town.
Oh, absolutely.
So yeah,
Yeah.
there were
Yeah.
things that regardless of whether you wore the uniform or not, you were kind of subject to local laws. Let's say.
And there's places right now today, certainly when you get outside, even in the South, you get outside of the major cities, there's places I'm not comfortable going,
Oh,
and absolutely, right, absolutely. So some things change and some things stay the same.
now you talked about your uh, experience in HBCUs. How did your time working in communications with historically black colleges and universities influence your perspectives on education and community engagement?
They were very positive, I would say, because for the most part, I had always gone into, for the most part, white schools. You know, I was one of the few black kids in school. So it was my first time. I would say, well, a couple times I moved back to Atlanta. So my ninth grade year and my 11th grade year, which I was in predominantly black schools. One of those years, the integration was going on. But being at the HBCU was really cool because I saw how committed the teachers were. I saw how they prized and poured the culture into their students, and they taught excellence, and you could see it in the band, you could see it in the STEM programs, you could see that it was a critical part of the black resistance to uphold black excellence and to not take excuses from anybody and to insist and to teach those kids that they were every bit as good as anybody else, and they had a responsibility to be successful and that they were going to be successful. So it was a wonderful experience for me. It was great to have that part of the culture as opposed to kind of what I had experienced at the University of Kansas, which, you know, and that's where I did run into some certain racism as a student there, because I remember the first story. I should tell this. The first story I wrote, and I turned it in, and the editor, of course, a white boy, he says, "Well, uh, who wrote this for you? Did you write this?" He couldn't believe that I could have written this story. So that was, you know, and I had a lot of classes there where I was the only black student. So that was not that unusual for me, but it was still very challenging. So yeah, I loved that working in the HBCUs. It was great because I was able to bring some things that I thought that they needed, and yet they gave me so much more than I needed.
Um, I want to kind of pick your brain here a little bit because one of the things that you were talking about just a moment ago was your experience with people like Dr. Martin Luther King and the SCLC and things, and along with the philosophy that I saw coming out of the HBCUs was the nonviolent principle. And being a young kid that had grown up in the projects and uh, things that I had seen, it was hard for me as a young black man to accept some of the things that were being done without pushing back. In other words, I mean, it was hard for me to turn my back on certain things, and though they say that's sticks and stones, so forth and so on, those words did hurt, and the nonviolent principle was something that didn't appeal to me because we were used to settling conflict with conflict.
Yeah.
How did you manage to keep that resolve?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that it is unnatural and unusual for somebody to turn the other cheek, somebody to let somebody spit in their face. James Lawson, Reverend James Lawson, who did a lot of training in Nashville, he taught the students at Fisk and Tennessee State uh, when they were challenging the city to integrate, and they developed. John Lewis came out of that movement. Lots of people, C.T. Vivian, Reverend C.T. Vivian. I don't think it's natural, James, for a human being, an individual, to be able to turn the other cheek just from in and of themselves. I think it takes something else. I think, to me, it's a relationship with Jesus Christ. That's the only way I could look the other way or take some of the things that I've taken, because I think that, it's what does Dr. King said, a riot is a language, of the when people don't recognize your dignity as a human being, you're going to do something. You're going to respond. You're going to revolt. You're going to tear things up. Uh, and I think that it was just modeled for me. So spending that time in Dr. King's organization and seeing these people, and some of them came out of, the ghetto, some of them came out of inner city, and they were not used to turning the other cheek. They just absolutely weren't. There's this one guy that was a veteran named Willie Bolden. He met Dr. King in a pool hall down in Savannah, and he was absolutely not nonviolent. But over time, he started learning the 7 principles of nonviolence. He started learning and getting exposed to those. And I think that part of the reason that we had some of the gains we had in this country, like the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65, there weren't enough black people to make white America do what it said it was, to live up to its true meaning of its creed, that we all men are created equal with certain inalienable rights. Because hell no, they weren't giving you those rights. But I think that because of the success, there was some success of the nonviolent. It didn't go all the way it needed to, but some success of the nonviolent movement, because people committed to being nonviolent, and even certain decent white people started seeing that and said, well, look, we're going to have to make some change here. We need to do something and white people came and joined the movement, and several of them were killed, like Viola Liuzzo, the housewife that came south from Detroit, when she saw the carnage on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and said, listen, I got to go do something. And the Klan hated her more than they hated black folk, right? They watched her. She stayed in the office, made phone calls, made signs. And so on the end of the Selma to Montgomery March, when they celebrated and they were leaving, they followed her and shot her and killed her because they hated them. They felt they were traitors. So I'm just saying that I think it was a God-inspired movement, and that the only way it was going to happen, because black people we didn't have the numbers to make them do the right thing. But yeah, I think that it's not human. Just the human condition can't make you just be nonviolent. It takes more than that.
I'm going to come back to you with that toward the end of our conversation here. But I want to go into your public service across the different administrations and adopting the change. Now, you served under 5 different administrations. How did you navigate the staffs and, well, the shifts in policies and leadership styles from Clinton to Biden?
It was really difficult. Sometimes it was more difficult than others, particularly when I had to support and even promote policies that I adamantly didn't agree with. There were those times, certainly most clearly in the Trump administration. Okay. Uh, I mean, we had spent some 6 years building up the Affordable Care Act when Obama, I think at least 5 presidents before him had tried to pass something akin to universal health care. And when the Affordable Care Act, more popularly known as Obamacare, was passed, And then when Trump got in there, what he said, and not even today, he says we have the concepts of replacement plan. But he says they tried over 70 times to replace and repeal the ACA. They couldn't do it. They tried. You remember when John McCain got up out of his deathbed in the hospital and came and did the thumbs down. So I probably shouldn't say this, but I think that Trump had this passion, this dogged desire, and he was on this mission to destroy Obama's legacy. So because we had the only all black staff of the 10 regions in the country, James. So we took a certain extra pride in serving the first black president and building this because the states I served in the 8 southeastern states. That's Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Kentucky, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, and I'm forgetting one. But so, and so you're down here where most black people live, the most poverty. You got the stroke belt, the diabetes belt, the heart disease, all of these disparities. And so we were able to help these people get health insurance, many of them for the very first time in their lives. So it was deeply personal to us, and it was something we were really proud of. And then to see this next guy come in, and his whole mission is to destroy all that. So yeah, it was hard. I think a lot of this, James, came from watching my father because, as somebody born in 28 who served 28 years in the military, he integrated the troops in Korea. He was, so and I had a lot of experiences with him where I saw him stopped by racist cops and I saw him abused, but I saw him maintain his dignity. And a lot of what he did, I know he did it, for me and my sisters. And so uh, I learned from him I think, the ability to adapt and still be successful in a situation that wasn't amenable to me. It was hostile to me sometimes, but so those were, I think, some of the traits that I learned that let me be adaptable. And still I knew I had to provide excellent service and I had to represent myself. And I knew I wasn't just representing myself, I was representing my family and the race because that's just the reality of being a black man in America, right?
Yes, yes. And uh, you find you often have to deal with some of those stereotypes abroad too. But I'm sure we'll get into some of those on our next conversation because there are a lot of things that I want to talk about, and we can't get them all done in one show. So uh, I guess this is kind of my way of inviting you back.
Yeah,
Uh,
love to, love to. And, hey, as we see the carnage that I think is gonna
oh,
come from this new administration.
a lot of people, have already, because I use the summer of 2025 as my yardstick, and people ask me why, but I'll get into that a little later on also, because I want to talk to you about your challenges in public affairs. What were the most significant challenges you faced as a public uh, affairs advisor to the HHS regional directors?
Well, part of it sometimes was that I don't think, like usually when they would first come in, particularly when we changed administrations, there was a deep distrust because the people we always worked for were the political appointees. So they worked directly for the secretary. So it was about that administration's policies. And so they know that me as a career person, I had been serving and fulfilling the policies of the opposite side of the aisle. And so I think it was a learning of their trust, earning their trust. And, I think that that was one of the real challenges. And another challenge was that I think that, quite frankly, the people in DC who would come in and out, they didn't really, I don't think, have a respect for, or in most instances, an understanding of the skill set and the capabilities of the people that they had out, the career staff that were going to be there through the next administration, and in many instances had been there for two or three before. And so I think because of they didn't have that trust and confidence in us, it made our job more difficult. Uh, so those were some of the things. And then particularly when we had to, for example, I will say this, and I know we're going to get into to Trump administration in more detail, but I did like the, quite honestly, working in the Bush administration, because they were the traditional Republicans who said, listen, as long as you get the job done, you kind of got freedom to do it how you want to do it. And so, we did have a lot of freedom in that administration, and there were some good things that he did. To be perfectly honest, obviously, going the mission, what missiles of that they went in there after in Iraq, obviously was a lie, and I think there was Katrina was mismanaged, but there was, I think he had this thing called, he called it compassionate capitalism. So like they instituted a program then that was aimed at helping and providing assistance and aid to children and families whose primary breadwinner was incarcerated. And they had another program called Grandparents Raising Grandchildren, because in our communities, particularly in one that I go to church in and serve at, the heroin epidemic took a whole lot of mothers even out of off the scene. So it was a support system that was there. Another one was called the Healthy Marriage Initiative, because there were some times in a certain part of our communities where kids hadn't really seen successful and healthy marriages, and so you helped to teach some of the principles. So those were good things, but it was a negative thing also. So I was off on a cruise, and we had our first Black assistant U.S. Surgeon General, who was a regional health administrator, working in my office. Very proud of this Black woman who grew up in Albany. And so I wrote this news release announcing her, elevation to this position. But because it wasn't the cookie cutter one that everybody else was using, and I talked about her being the first Black and the difference she had made, and they harassed me on the cruise ship, James, told me they were going to do this and that and the other to me, because I wrote this really, and it was nothing that was not factual about it. So those are the kind of things that were really frustrating about, you know, adapting to change and the challenges of being in public affairs, because the goal is to make that person look good. And so she had had a stellar accomplishment. I wanted to make her look good, and yet you don't want me to do it. So I, those were some of the frustrations that I had in times, and even in the Obama administration. I'll tell you this: the first day Obamacare opened, which was October 1st, 2013, after a lot of build up, a lot of fanfare, we had spent time going through. At that time, I didn't have 8 states, I had 4 states, because they hired a second person to come in and work with me. So we went to all of our major markets and we built coalitions with these partners like the NAACP, the Children's Defense Fund, the group called the Boat People that were Asian groups largely. My Brother's Keeper, which is largely LGBTQ plus group. I had to remember all that. And so all these people were not paid for the most part, but they wanted to see their communities get access to health care. So we did all this work. We did all this training. We got ready. And then the very day that the launch of the ACA is when the Republican-led Congress shut down the government. So me, because at that time I was non-exempt, so we kept working. where most of the federal people had to go got home, and so the website was crashing left and right. Everything was going wrong. The Republicans were ripping Obama and Obamacare left and right. Well, we had people in the media, the black media, the progressive media, who wanted to tell the other side of the story, but they wouldn't let us reach out to them. And I think that was one of the challenges of Obama being relatively new and a novice at that high level at that time. Now, of course, he solved and did so much good that it's you'd be nitpicking, in my opinion, because he solved the dot-com industry, the banking industry, the auto industry. I had a brother-in-law who said, you're gonna get the country in as bad a shape as you can, then you're gonna give it to a black man. So, but so those were some of the things when we could have helped, and then the press was mad at us because they wanted to tell the story, they wanted to say something positive, but we weren't allowed to engage them to help them do it. So those are some of the frustrations and adapting to that change. And then we built that trust over time. But we got blasted for a while there.
Yeah, I want to ask you to elaborate a little bit more on that as we get into the Trump administration experience.
Sure.
Uh, and the longest 4 years. Can you share a pivotal moment in your book that encapsulates your experience during the Trump administration?
Sure. I could tell you a couple stories. Let me see. One was, okay, his communication method was Twitter, right? You know, he that was all he did. He tweeted. He rarely held a press conference, but Twitter was his thing. So by far, he was the most divisive president I ever served. He demonized women. He demonized Latinos as rapists and thieves and immigrants. Asians it was the China virus. Uh, Black women, he called them nasty. For everybody from the Squad to Keisha Lance Bottoms, our mayor here, the mayor of Chicago. Anybody that pushed back on him, a strong person, he demonized them. Black run cities, he calls them slums and rat infested. So he was masterful at keeping people at odds with themselves. And so I got to the place, James, that I'm a late night owl and not an early morning person, but about 4:30, I'd find myself unconsciously reaching over half asleep to grab my phone off the nightstand to look to see what he has tweeted that night that I was going to have to react to in the morning. And so that was one of the things when they finally told us that we were not going to be supporting, this is in his first year in 2017, we weren't going to be doing what we had been doing the last 4 years out in the communities, out in the states, out in the regions, supporting what they call the navigators. These were the people that were paid to help people understand and enroll in the Affordable Care Act / Obamacare. And a lot of these people, again, James, they were our people. They were poor. They were less educated. They didn't make a lot of money. A lot of them already didn't trust the government for a lot of real reasons, right? Tuskegee and a whole bunch of other things. And so they're the ones that needed the help. And so uh, to me, when then you said he slashed the budget by like 70%, and then he told us we couldn't go help anymore. So one of the things that was a joy, one of the highlights of my year every year was when the open enrollment used to be like 4 months long. And when it would open, I would go to Mississippi. They would invite me there. That was one of the 4 states that I managed for the Office of the Secretary. And we would take a 6-city tour. We'd start just outside of Memphis to the south, go through the Mississippi Delta, work our way on down to Jackson, and then down to the Gulf Coast. Well, these partners of ours, the Primary Care Association, a lot of people don't know that federally qualified health centers provide 40% of the primary health care services for most of the people in the country. And these are people who are uninsured, but they can go get primary health care on a sliding fee scale. So you can get it free, or if you made $5,000, you might have to pay $10 for the. So every year I did this. And then when they told us we weren't going to do it, then I had to write a letter to these people and say, hey, I'm not going to be able to come this year. So they write back, and we go through this thing, and then the next thing that happens is like 3 days later, we get this newsletter that says HHS abandons Mississippians. So my heart goes to my. I'm choking because I know the first thing I have to do is go into my boss, who told me we agreed we needed to tell them we weren't coming. So then we have to call up to DC because we didn't want them to hear this somewhere else and let them know this is happening. So we call up there, and the head of Intergovernmental External Affairs, which I worked for, who worked for the secretary, and the head personnel, they get me and my boss, who was a white Republican woman from North Carolina. She was a congresswoman, very loved Donald Trump. She was a great anti-Obamacare and ACA person. She was really good at articulating why it was so terrible. Okay. But even she said, hell, we had 6 years to replace and repeal, and we couldn't do it. So we need to be out supporting the people. She was agreeing with me. So the personnel person, who's this black woman, and I don't think she wanted to do this, but she's on the phone with her boss, and she says, well, Deric, why did you feel like the need to write this letter? To tell them you weren't coming. It's okay. I'm here stewing, James. I can't show it. I can't say anything. But I'm sitting there saying, what the hell? You know. So in a couple seconds, I said, well, would you have preferred we just didn't show up? I mean, they were expecting us, right? So then, and they told me, okay, tomorrow our Assistant Secretary of Public Affairs at headquarters is going to send you an apology that you're going to send to the people of Mississippi. You're going to apologize. Now, I don't know what the hell I was apologizing for, James. You're going to apologize. And the other thing you're going to do is go home tonight and write a justification as to why you think it was important that you be out, go to Mississippi, and you be out supporting them. So I did this long, extensive thing, of course, and I knew that it wasn't going to make a damn bit of difference, but I did it because they told me to. But James, do you think I ever got this letter that I was supposed to write, send this apology? No, I didn't. Now, because guess what? They wanted to throw the rock, but then hide the hand. They don't want to put anything on paper. Now, 3 days after that, guess what happens? One of the coordinators of the trip, this organization called MHAP, Mississippi Health Advocacy Program, and they work exclusively to help provide health answers and insurance opportunities for the least of these, the poor people in Mississippi. And, it's the poorest state in the country, right? So he's on Ari Melber on MSNBC. And Ari Melber, which I watch the show all the time, and he has this teaser. He says, explosive new news, HHS uh, uh, is being exposed for undermining the Affordable Care Act. So right then, I'm starting to cuss under my breath because I said, I know this is coming back to me. So he comes in and they bring the guest on, and he says, well, I didn't exactly say that they were undermining the ACA. He said, but that's exactly what they were doing. And so my email is up on the screen on MSNBC, James. And I'm really saying, oh crap, the crap is really gonna hit the fan there. So of course I call my boss, and then we tell them, and then what happens, and then they start calling all these other regions, the 10 regions in the country, and they see this is not an isolated incident, that they are really sabotaging, and that's the word they use, sabotaging the ACA. So after that, I couldn't even have any conversations with any of the navigators, any of the federally qualified health centers. any of those things. We couldn't. Somebody I worked with in CMS, which funded the Navigators, that's the Center for Medicare and Medicaid. She wouldn't even send out the stuff that CMS sent to her to send because you know what she told me? She said, "Look, I got two kids at home and they like to eat." And so after from then on, it was crazy. I knew that we couldn't do no right. It just and we didn't get this is the first administration we never got a raise, James, and we were still consistently at the top performing of the 10 regions. And so and then the last part of that, there's this woman who did what I did, but she did it at a higher level, and she did it for the political appointees. And if somebody I know in D.C. in the lunchroom overheard this woman say, well, you know, I don't like that Derek. She had never even met me because I hear he's still pushing the Obama agenda. So it was crazy. And then we'd see stuff like, and I know we have some immigration issues, James, but we see things like when we see these kids and their parents sometimes washing up on the shores of the river Rio Grande. Some of them had walked 1,000 miles to get to America. You know what I'm saying? And to me, our little four-person all-black office, we saw it took us back to slavery and us coming over here in the bellies of slave ships and how we were treated and mistreated. And we saw our own kids in those kids that were separated from their parents at the borders. And we didn't have a role in that, but we had a responsibility to care for those children. That's what HHS did. And so that was one of the few times I was really ashamed of working at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
Well, you kind of answered my next question. So I was going to ask you about the racial dynamics and how you felt as a black employee. How did you perceive and handle the racial dynamics under the Trump administration?
It
Uh,
was, I held my nose, James, and this is the attitude I took because I had people close to me who's asked me sometimes, did I ever feel like I was being a sellout or being and my I think my answer was that sometimes I hated what I had to do or what I was such. I mean, because one of the things you know how Trump was, he was always tweeting about. So like he wanted to make the justice marches, which is about you and I know about the killing of unarmed black men, for the most part black men. He wanted to make it about patriotism and the flag. Well, we know it wasn't about no damn patriotism and the flag. So I'm seeing all these tweets and I work for this person. So and I see how he dehumanizes everybody. I mean, the immigrants in particular. And so it was really, really tough. That's why, it was the longest 4 years of my life. And I'm so thankful I mean, we got to collectively do this next 4 years and then may have to run him out of the White House because he ain't leaving on his own accord. At least that's what he said up until now. But it was disheartening, and it was something that was really demoralizing, and especially again for our all black office, and plus we were always under the microscope the whole time. So yeah, it was tough, and my colleague who had the other four states, as soon as he was elected, she said, I can't do this. I'm out of here. I think part of the reason that I was able to do it and I think and still thrive, James, is because again of what I saw my father modeled for me, and I think that then he rose to the rank of he was a command sergeant major, and I know there were probably some of his colleagues black colleagues who resented him but he knew how to play that game and that role, and sometimes I think you have to do what you have to do to survive, to be perfectly honest. But that was part of it. And one of the things that helped me, James, is for the only administration I worked in where I would have people, reporters, and I was a reporter myself for all those years, and the editor would call me up and said, "Why are you sending me this excrement? You know it's not true, and I'm not going to print it." And so I never had that before, even though, Obama was not popular to, the conservative rank, right? What did Mitch McConnell say? His number one goal was to make Obama a one-term president. You remember Joe Wilson, the congressman out of South Carolina, stood up when he was giving his State of the Union address. He yelled, broke all protocols, said, "You lie." And then he also said it's the politically correct thing to be against the black man in the White House. So they didn't even hide it. So, but I felt like I could still do some good staying on the inside. This is, you'll appreciate this. That lady in CMS I mentioned to you, somebody in DC called her and told them to get rid of everything, all the literature they that said had Obama's name on it. Get rid of it. Now, it was still functional. This was all around the Affordable Care Act, telling people how to get help, who to call, how much money you could make, what the different plans were. So we got on the phone and called all the navigators, the federally qualified health centers, all the people who could use that literature. And we said, asked them to meet us on the curb. And we packed it all up and took it down there for them so that it didn't get wasted and thrown away. And that was all because Trump hated the ACA and Obama so much. So I could still do some good. And some of those people would call me from time to time and say, "Listen, I know you're in an untenable position, and we appreciate you doing what you can do to help us." And it is an encouragement. So because of things like that, it helped me get through it. But it was real clear real early uh, that I needed to be documenting what I was experiencing and what I was seeing. And so a lot of that is about, him and COVID and him and his attacks on the Affordable Care Act, and lots of stories of people who lives were saved because of the Affordable Care Act. Things like, even the Republicans loved the fact that you could keep your kid on your insurance until they were 26, things like that. But they hated that you telling them that you had to buy the insurance if you qualified for it, because that's one thing I found, James, about it's hard to tell why white people don't want to be told what to do by nobody, whether it's for their good or not.
um, well, at least by someone else.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
but
absolutely.
but uh, one of the things that kind of bothered me, and um, watching uh, journalists down through the ages, Walter Cronkite, Chet, I mean, all the guys that
Chet
I used
Brinkley, yeah, uh-huh.
to, and then all of a sudden, I see this shift
Yeah.
where people do not trust the news.
Hmm.
They do not trust what is right before their eyes.
Yeah.
They certainly believed it when they were showing the pictures of tech, and when they were showing the pictures of, the evacuation of Vietnam. They
Yeah.
believed the journalists then.
Yes.
What did you see as the turning point where all of a sudden the media was uh, unscrupulous? The media was all of a sudden fake news.
Yeah.
Where did this come
Yeah.
from? I mean, I'm sure you was it a gradual thing, or to me it just seemed like overnight we were fake. Everything was fake news,
So,
unless you
yeah,
listen
no,
to
I
Fox.
I
Yeah.
absolutely have some thoughts on that. I did a podcast recently called Ethics in the Media, and the guy asked me that. So when I went to J school, you took all these classes on ethics, okay? So there was a standard because they call journalists it's the fourth estate. There's this responsibility there, and then a lot of this I lay at the feet of the Trump administration. His main spokesman, Kellyanne Conway, came up with the term fake news, and she came up with the term alternative facts. Now, what the hell is an alternative facts, James? It's a fact or it's not, right? Alternative
Grandma
fact.
used to call it a lie.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And so, and then Fox News, because of their allegiance to, and you know what, because they said that the Dominion voting machines did this, that, and the other. They paid hundreds of millions of dollars because of the lies. They knew they were telling lies. So for people who don't pay attention and that they get in these various echo chambers, and that's the only place they get their news from Newsmax and News Nation and some of these really conservative places, then you're going to believe what you hear. And so it is real disconcerting to hear the distrust of the media. And to be perfectly honest, a lot of the people who are now some of the talking heads in the mainstream media don't have any journalism training. They use many of them come from the political sphere, and so they're going to be very slanted. And yeah, there's no. I give an example that ties to that, and even the distrust of our healthcare system. So, like, the scientists tell you one thing, the health scientists, the doctors, and yet people rather believe, other people. So, like, for example, almost 100 years before this last pandemic, in 1919, uh, you know, the Spanish flu killed just millions of people. But people were told by the doctors, come get your shot. And people lined up for miles. There was no challenge, no question. People did it. But now, because of all this misinformation, all these, um, you know, quacks and people who have such distrust of the system, people don't know what to believe anymore. And most people won't do their own homework. When Trump spoke to the VFW in Kansas City, he says, don't believe your lying eyes. Believe me. And and people, that's what they do. They believe him. But he gets in the rallies and he tells them, he tells his own people, I don't care about you. I just care about your vote. Still they vote for him. So I just think the media has gone right down this rabbit hole and been sucked down there right with him and uh, his minions, to be perfectly honest. And people will sell out to get what they want to do, and it's just a terrible thing.
Yeah, I mean, especially like I said, I mean, when you look at, down through the ages to, what journalists have contributed, and now all of a sudden, these people are scorned and
Yeah,
considered,
yeah,
I mean, even now, if you're a podcaster, if you're a blogger, uh, and you don't follow certain norms, you are attacked. It is, I mean, it used to be all right to have a difference of opinion, but we don't do that anymore.
but and I'm real good with. I'm fine with a difference of opinion, but let's base your statement and your stance on truth and facts, not you know something that you just pulled out of the sky. I
Yeah.
mean, give you an example. So recently, President President elect Trump has been saying that he saved Obamacare. Now, come on now. But anybody who's paid any attention, how much bull that is. He didn't.
Well,
He did everything to destroy it, right? But guess what? And then his people are going around mimicking and parroting what he says.
well, people also believe the fact that he saved HBCUs. That was
Yeah,
left over from
yeah,
Obamacare. He had nothing to do with that. He signed a piece of paper. That's what he did. He
Absolutely.
signed a piece of paper.
Yeah.
But
And they credit him for the stimulus checks. And, Nancy Pelosi fought for those stimulus checks. He held them up to put his name on it in big letters.
yeah,
But it
yeah.
works. It worked. That's the scary thing.
Yes, yes.
But like
Uh,
Elon Musk said, Americans about to feel the pain, right? A
yeah,
whole lot
well,
of it.
yeah, well, only Indians and Asians are smart enough to work for him anyway. So, that automatically excludes us. But
Yeah.
I do read some, and
Yeah.
audibles are a wonderful thing. You don't even have to read. You know, they just, they talk to you.
That's one of my
But
next big steps. Yeah.
uh, so let's talk about your SCLC contributions, and let's reflect a little bit on your time as uh, the National Communications Director of the SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference. What legacy do you believe Dr. King's work leaves for communicators today?
Well, he was a brilliant communicator, certainly. Maybe now it's a shame that you have to say that Trump is brilliant too as a communicator, but he spoke truth to power. I think that he his focus really was the least of these, whereas the NAACP really was focused on middle class America, but he was focused on the poor, the uneducated, the people largely in the South. And I think that he helped them believe that they could break free of the Jim Crow society and have better lives, that they could move their family forward. And I think that was a real important thing. So for me to go to work for that organization, to sit in his chair and actually once put my feet up on his desk. Of course, he was long gone, but still, there was this aura about working there and being part of that, and having a chance to get to know, not get to know, some of them I got to know, but work with Rosa Parks and Jesse Jackson and C.T. Vivian and all of these great leaders. Andy Young, it just was a phenomenal experience. One of the things I'm excited about was I ended up being the principal non-Muslim promoter of the Million Man March. So Joe Lowry was the first mainstream civil rights organization to sign on to be a part of the Million Man March. And it wasn't that he stood with Farrakhan, but the issue of black men being supportive and a foundation in black communities was the principle that he stood on. And he wrote something called the Seven Sunbeams that touched on those points and why it was beyond religion for us. It was about the principle of black men being there for their communities and their families. So I was proud of that. Uh, we did things like all kind of issues around certainly injustice, but we challenged all these companies that um, didn't want to do right by our communities. Like we signed these huge multi-million dollar pacts with companies like Texaco and Publix and Winn Dixie because they would come into our communities and they set up stores, but they wouldn't hire black managers, they wouldn't hire black vendors. And so we pushed them to do those things. And that was important because that was kind of the economics all the way back to Operation Breadbasket was one of the foundational points that the SCLC did. We worked on issues like educational tracking and challenging these schools that would put all of our kids into these vocational tracks. And there's nothing wrong with the vocational track. I mean, you learn to be a plumber, you learn to be an electrician, you learn to be all of those things, air conditioning. But what if somebody had the gifts to be a doctor or an engineer or an architect. We wanted black people to get the full spectrum. Certainly, we challenge issues like disparities in sentencing around crack and powdered cocaine. Why does one get 7 times the sentence as the other? Because one is the drug of choice of white elites and white businessmen, not poor people from the ghetto. So these are the kind of things that we were
So they
really,
thought.
yeah.
So they thought.
Yeah, so they thought.
Yeah.
So they thought. And even the criminal justice system, which Dr. Larry called the new Jim Crow, which was just it been privatized, and it just all these people still made money over all these usually poor black and brown people who were so incarcerated. So those kind of things. The burning of the black churches was another big issue that we were front and center on. In fact, Dr. Lowry challenged President Clinton to raise that to, and he's on tape saying that Clinton is to raise that to a level of national importance, uh, because it was the 60s and the 50s all over again. Black churches just being torched, particularly across the South. So those were things that I was really proud to be able to be a part of and to play a role in. And it was something like it prepared me for HHS, for the federal government, but I had so much more flexibility and leeway out there doing that with them that and it and you mentioned, I don't know if you mentioned this, but so my first book, because of my experiences at the SCLC, and I kept meeting all these people, James. Most of them were 70, 80, 90 years old. No health insurance, no life insurance, no 401k. Most of the time, they were high school graduates. And I started asking them, I said, well, listen, because I travel around the South with Dr. Lowry and the Brain Trust, and I kept meeting them. I said, young people today, for the most part, they don't know who you are. They don't know what you gave up, what you sacrificed, what you invested when you were part of this movement that tore down the Cotton Curtain and challenged America to start to be what it said it was, this place of equality and justice. And I said, do you resent it? And almost every time, James, that person would start to get emotional and they start telling me, the little old ladies would grab my hand and say, oh no, baby, you don't know how special it was to be part of that movement. When we challenged America, we brought about change. And what they meant was the Voting Rights Act of 65 and the Civil Rights Act of 64 and all these things that weren't there before they came along, and they played that role. And so it pressed upon my heart. I said, well, listen, because of what people like James did, who went before me and went in Vietnam, and the first generation of our people who got to go to any college that they had the grades to get into, I have a responsibility to help these people tell their stories, because some of them weren't capable of telling them and some of them were. So I wrote this book, and it focused on 20 of these people who were part of this movement. And so it really struck a core. And the other reason I did it was because of what Dr. King said. And he talked about these people. He called them his unknown ground crew. And he said, without these people, without the unknown ground crew, the jet flights to freedom could never have left the earth. He said, you'll not read about these people in Who's Who, but when the shining light of truth is focused on this glorious time in which we live, we have a better land, a finer civilization, because these humble children of God were willing to suffer for righteousness' sake. And that's what that turning the other cheek were. But all of them didn't. Like there was a warrior named Robert, Dr. Robert. Oh my goodness, I don't remember his last name right now. He was the leader of the St. Augustine movement, but he was a well-trained man, and he organized this little military group, and they were not just being nonviolently resistant, but he did that because they were just so much that went on with them. So telling those stories and being around these people, James, has just been magical to me. It is just
What was the name of your first book?
It's called The Longest I'm sorry, excuse me. It's called Living in the Shadows of a Legend, Unsung Heroes and Sheroes Who Marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And if people go to my website, which is my name, DericGilliard.com, then it'll pull up both of my books. But I've been able to. I've spoken to the troops in Germany at 7 bases about that first book, James. I went in just before Desert Storm. They said we got this little window, and I was brought in as a guest of General Ricardo Sanchez, who ran the whole, European force. And I think his people are the ones that pulled Saddam Hussein out of the spider hole, right? I was the first keynote speaker at the Rosa Parks Museum and Library in Montgomery when it opened, and spoken at, lots of colleges and universities and places across the country. And so, but this is very different because that one was, about reconciliation and nonviolence, and this one is about the hell we're about to go through. So,
You,
excuse me.
you got to get some of these on Audible.
You know
Mr.
what? That I'm going to do that. That's my next goal. It really is, James. And I keep hearing it, so I got the message. That's going to happen in the next few months.
Yes, most definitely. Like I said, I used to, use Audible while I'm doing PT. I mean, you can do it in so many places, and I mean, we have so much wasted time
And
that
so
you
many
can.
people have commutes these days that are
Oh,
long, and as
right,
they keep telling me, that's a great time for me to, take that in. And so,
right,
yes,
right.
message received, and I will do that, my brother.
Okay, but now you a lot of people I'm going to say don't know about cues. I happen to be affiliated with a bunch of Qs during my time at Fort Campbell, going down to Nashville. That was during the period, of course, of Jefferson Street Joe, the only black man to
Oh
ever
yeah.
win a Super Bowl. So I'm familiar with Qs and stepping, and the great competition between the alphas and the kappas. Tell me about your experience as a member of Omega Psi Phi,
So
and
I pledged
how
fairly late.
interesting.
Yeah. So I pledged relatively late. I think I was committed. In those days they used to call them GDIs. I didn't never say that because I wouldn't say that. But and then it just there was something about these brothers at the University of Kansas. And again, there were only like 500 black folk there, period, out of 20,000 people. But there was something that struck a chord with me. And for me personally, again, I was very introverted, very quiet, very shy. So it helped bring me out of that. It brought me to a place where I could have a career that I could become I can be a public speaker and be the face of a franchise when needed, or representing these various peoples. I think the principles, manhood, scholarship, perseverance, and uplift, apply to your whole life, not just when you pledge. And we have you develop this brotherhood. I'm gonna tell you that's really something that's special. Several of us get back together once a year. We go back to the yard, and we usually go back for the last basketball game of the regular season. And so we stay together. We communicate. We have a call next week about this next trip. And so we still support each other's family. We still mourn when we lose one of ourselves. So, I mean, the principles and lots of great men. And there was a time I was just all about Omega, and I'm still all about Omega. But I credit the whole Divine Nine. It's this fellowship that's there, and we all pull together behind Kamala's election, I think, in a very united front. And so I think those are important things because it's kind of partly goes back to Du Bois called it the talented tenth. And these are these groups of folk who, they go and get their education, and many times they can rise to some of these key positions and where they can influence our society and make a difference. And Omega, I was at a chapter meeting just a few days ago, and it's a significant part of my life, and it's not all of my life, but it's something that I'm excited now that I'm off the road and have more time that I could pour myself into. And we do a lot of things around, like I do a lot of work with the NAACP now that the SCLC is and we do that through the chapter. And so we do all this engagement around registering young people to vote. And I was able to speak to the NAACP state meeting in Alabama recently, and again registering voters at high schools and other places. So yeah, the fraternity, I think it challenges you to think about other people and to give something back.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Uh, that community spirit is certainly alive.
And I've had
Um,
these friends for 50 years now. And
yeah, and someone once told me if you can have one friend for all of your life, you
yeah,
consider yourself wealthy.
that's right.
So, living in the shadow of a legend, what inspired you to write the book, and what impact do you hope it has on your readers? And we're talking about your last book now, the longest 4 years of my life, I believe it is.
Yeah, yeah. So my first book, I think the impact, the inspiration came from Dr. King when he accepted his Nobel Peace Prize, the youngest person to do that, and he talked about this unknown ground crew. And I said, "Wow, I keep meeting these people, and I don't think it's just a happenstance. I think that I'm supposed to do something here." And because of all of their sacrifices. And so just for me to spend time with these people, the 20 of them that I wrote about, there are now three of them are left. And to be perfectly honest, of course, most of them are black, most of them are male, but there's women, there's black women, there's white women, there's a Jewish man. And so I think that it exemplifies that movement, which was a broad based movement. It brought in people like Marlon Brando and Peter, Paul, and Mary and Joan Baez, because because it was a young people's movement. And so it helped tip the scales and push this country to do some of the things that it had refused to do up until then. So I'm real excited to share their stories, and talk about it. Like I'm going to three libraries here in Metro Atlanta uh, in the next few weeks to talk to young people about, not young people, but whoever comes, about the contributions of these people. I've spoken at probably 40 colleges and universities across the country, and some are HBCUs, but most aren't. And what I'm thinking, James, when I talk to these white kids who a lot of times, are more interested in our history than we are, and I know some of them are going to be CEOs, some of them are going to be hiring managers, some of them are going to approve the loans for somebody who wants to buy a house or a car. And I want them to understand that the Black experience in America is very different than their experience. And so a lot of our kids have further to come. So, you can help sometimes give a leg up to some of these kids who, I had a daughter that went to St. John's, and when she gets there, wanted at that time, she wanted to be a doctor, and she goes into the lab, and she sees all this equipment that she never saw at her high school. So I want to help them understand that a lot of them had advantages that some of our children didn't have. And so some of them it pricks their conscience, and then they're more likely to help somebody that they know works hard and does everything right, but they started from somewhere behind where they did. They didn't have the privilege they had. They didn't have, like, when black soldiers came out of World War II, they were denied the GI Bill in many instances. They couldn't get that FHA loan, where white families started, even from the military, started to build that generational wealth, because we know it's about owning a home. That's where it starts. So helping educate these kids and find some who are interested in being allies to this in the struggle for justice and equality is something that was really important to me. And I think that that's something that can help live on in this book, my first book, Living in the Shadows of a Legend.
And what about your second book? Do
My,
you think is this a book of? Are you worried about the future? I mean, are these? Is it based on observations of what you think this coming administration is going to do?
well, I'd hoped and had gotten at one point to believing there wasn't going to be a second administration, and so it was for historical purposes, because this was the closest to having somebody in office in our lifetime, James, certainly, that saw themselves as an oligarch, saw themselves as a would-be dictator. And so I thought it would be something that would be great in history departments in colleges and universities, and social sciences and health policy, African American studies, political science. It would be a treatise where people could learn about what happened because nobody else has written a book that is a career person about their time in the Trump administration. You all these people in the DC bubble, but you and I know that's not the real world. I'm out here where people are, trying to figure out how to put gas in their car and how to pay the mortgage, and whether they can buy good healthy foods and for their kids and their families. And so a lot of this book is about the stories of these everyday people in these various communities, some in Latino communities, some in again in the Mississippi Delta, and some and so I write from three perspectives: perspective of a black man, because you and I know we have to see life from a different set of lenses as white people do; from a faith perspective, because I am a believer, I am a Christian; and third, as a justice advocate and warrior, because I do believe is that we have to let justice roll down like a river, righteousness like a mighty stream. I think that we part of the backlash we're seeing now, James, is that they say by roughly 2042, this country will become a minority majority country. And so people who have always been in control are going to have to learn to do some sharing of the power and the influence in this country. So I just felt compelled that I needed to tell this story about what I experienced, how coercive some of it was, and who the victims were in a lot of this policy. Like at least 300,000 people died of COVID that didn't have to die because the leadership said it's going to just disappear. It's not that bad. And so, whereas, if we had a leader like Churchill said, he told his people in England, "Hey, we're gonna catch hell. This is gonna be the fight for our very existence." But you tell people the truth, and then I think people can deal with the truth. And so I just thought that it was a story that needed to be told, and because of my undergirding in the SCLC, where people that was, they knew we almost never won a battle, James. We almost always lost, but we never gave in and we never gave up. And plus the influence of my father and and his brothers and some of the other people in my lives who were just unrelenting in their quest to have justice and equality in this country. And that's why I did it.
Uh, are there any future projects in the making? Have you
There's a
thought?
project. Yeah, there's a project I'm real excited about, James, and actually this came through this white architect that I go to church with. I'm in an intensely multicultural church that is really focuses on justice because justice is woven throughout the Bible. Okay, so he knew that I had this background in civil rights, and so he recruited me to be a part of this project with his multinational firm, and they won the bid to build a national monument to the National Park Service and Department of Interior, honoring the original Freedom Riders. You know, they took those two buses that left DC coming south, and
Right,
one of them was firebombed in Anniston, Alabama. And so that's where they're building this park, honoring not just the 13 original firefighters, but all of the Freedom Riders who took part and contributed. John Lewis is probably the most famous of the Freedom Riders. So of the 13 original, the only two living left were here in Metro Atlanta. Both of them in bad shape, and one of them, Charles Person, died last week. And so for me to get to spend time with some of these people and to help to tell their story and help memorialize them so that generations for years to come, from decades to come, will hear about their heroism and about how they, put their lives on their line and their bloods and bled and were beaten and just denigrated be, to help make this country a better country, because it's still not what it should be and could be, but a better country. To be a part of that is so cool. I don't know how long it's going to take to get it built, but I've been working on this project now for about a year and a half, and we're getting close to something really concrete happening. We brought in a bunch of people to let them, the Freedom Riders themselves, their families, people who supported it, like the NAACP and CORE and SNCC and some of these other organizations. And so it's a project I'm really excited about, because my hope and prayer when I retired, James, was that I could stay engaged in justice works that makes a difference. And so I'll keep going around the country and speaking about both these books. Now, this second one is getting a real frosty reception, I'm going to tell you, for the most part, because I don't know if people are afraid of Trump, but because it's controversial. Because hey, he was controversial, but my goal is my call in my life is to speak truth to power, and that's what I'm trying to do.
that is a very noble. Uh, you know, I want to say and admirable because it's as I said, just looking at from the perspective of a black man and what they took Obama through. Even to the point of wanting to declare him a
Yeah,
non-citizen. And I cannot see things. Maybe I'm just a pessimist, but I'm also kind of looking back at our history and young people today. I don't think are willing to take that type of abuse without uh, fighting back. And this is one of the reasons why I keep mentioning uh, unrest. When you have a person that uh, more or less thinks that he is dictated not only by uh, the moral majority, but by Christianity and the different uh, denominations you see that are backing this man, soon to be inaugurated next Monday. Uh, do you fear for justice in our country? And I use that word in quotes because there's a justice system for us, as you know, and there's a justice system that is for them. Uh, and I see, or I foresee, if you know things come to fruition as he is speaking out of his mouth, uh, I fear uh, January 21st. We might have troops in Portland. We might have troops in Minneapolis. What is your thought? Do you really think that this man, is he just speaking for the rhetoric like he did with grocery prices, or do you think that this is really a threat to the minority communities? Did I lose you?
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I had muted. I'm sorry. So James, I believe that he is intent on doing everything he can. I think that he wants to take us back. I think he wants to. You hear him. I mean, to me and you, the time for buying people and buying countries is over. But hey, he wants to take over. He wants to make Canada 51st state. He wants what he said, the Gulf of Mexico. He wants to be the Gulf of America. He wants to buy Norway and some. I mean, he, it's
Greenland.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah. I, we heard about
all of these.
Project 2025, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, at least 12 of his people that he is
but he
bringing
said he
into his
never read it.
administration.
He
He
he,
said
he
he
never
never
read
met
it.
it, but all these, yeah, we know he said a lot of things, right? But you know what? Let me tell you, that's probably true, James, because he is known as the least reading president we've probably ever had. He's not a reader. That's not what he does. But that doesn't mean he wasn't affiliated, associated with these people, because he absolutely was. And why would he hire all these people if he had no knowledge of who they are,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But at least 12 of them are of these architects of this. And yeah, I mean, we are in a place where our young people, to a large extent, don't believe in the system, and we understand why. Now, we didn't believe in the system, but we still knew there were certain things that we felt a moral obligation to do to work within the system. I tell young people all the time, okay, please vote while you're building whatever you're building on the side, because we have to figure out how to do more than one thing at a time. But yeah, there will be unrest because I think there's going to be more pressure applied. The safety nets that we have are going to be snatched out from under all of these people that are. Many of our people in our inner cities. It's going to be much, much harder. I mean, he wants to impact Social Security. I mean, there's just so much that is going to be at risk now when he takes office. And I think that there will be unrest, there will be discomfort, and um, people when you put people under pressure like that, there's going to be some level of explosion. But I think that what we're going to see is we could see a very repressive response to that. You know what I'm saying? Because he I don't think he has any problem with just pushing back really hard, and a lot of people are going to be at risk, and people are. I mean, what do you do? I mean, we're going to be in a very untenable situation, where we used to say, damned if you do and damned if you don't. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I think that it's going to be a very painful 4 years.
I mean, we still have places in Detroit, Chicago, that have never recurred,
Hmm.
have never benefited or been able to rebuild since
Yeah,
the summer of '68.
yeah,
What are we going to do now?
yeah, yeah. No, I agree with you. I agree with you. I think that sometimes um, it's almost like people think they wanted a king. Well, you're going to get a king, and you're gonna hurt because of it. We're all going to hurt because of it. And then, the old saying, "Be careful what you ask for." Well, we've asked for this, and we're going to get it. And I think it's a history, our history in this country. Sometimes it's one step forward and two steps back. Well, I think we're going to be taking some backward steps here, James, and it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be easy, and it's going to be a whole lot of pain and heartache. And really, for almost anybody who's not one of the elites and one of the upper crust in our society, it's just going to be that way.
Well, I'd like to invite you back in 120 days and let's see what's happening.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All
I love
right.
to come back. I thank you, my brother, for the time. This has been great conversation. Yeah, let's track it and let's see where we are. I don't know if we're going to get that rage in Harlem by this summer, but I think that stuff is coming, and it's almost like you put a frog on a pot in a little warm water, right? And so it may take a little while, but it's coming.
Yeah, yeah.
I,
Well,
I
like I
appreciate you,
said,
brother.
I appreciate you, my brother. I would love to have you back in 120 days. And thank you so much for your time this evening. And I look forward to talking with you again.
And I hope to have that audio book by then. If not, it'll be right after. But this is one of my high priorities. Thank you, brother.
All right. I'll be one of the first in line to get it. I promise.
Absolutely. That
All
won't
right.
be
You
on
have a
me.
good night.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you. You have a great
All
night.
right. All right.
Uh, I thank everyone for listening. That was Mr. Deric Gilliard, and we appreciate his time and effort. And please check out our series, We the People. This is our first in many acts. I intend to have at least two guests every month. Thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to listening to talking with you in 2 weeks. Have a great night, everyone. Appreciate.